Today's video is all about prostatitis, the inflammation, potential infection, pathogenic exposure, and histamine response of the male body and the enlargement of the prostate. Stay tuned if you're a gentleman dealing with prostate inflammation, prostatitis, high PSA levels, or any type of prostate dysfunction, frustration. This video is meant to help you immediately. Stay tuned for this video. So gentlemen, one of the video topics that you've requested is for me to dig further into prostatitis and your diet as well as your gut health. And I'm really excited to dig further into this particular prostate related challenge because there are many gentlemen watching and who are subscribers that might be dealing with a staging of prostate cancer, and others who might be dealing with prostatitis, and others dealing with high PSA levels, or any combination of in the mix of all of those. So that whole mix, the stats are really alarming. 1 in 7 gentlemen will develop prostate cancer in their lifetime. And the reality is that we're all walking around with cancer cells in our body, but that doesn't mean that we have cancer. What happens is we have an environmental factor within our body, inflammation, sometimes it's viral, bacterial elements that start to plague and change the cellular makeup of our cells. And that ends up becoming a situation where we have an environment that breeds the likelihood of these cancer cells to take root, grow, multiply, and cause grief in our body. Obviously, prostate cancer is on the severity scale of prostate challenges, but in the middle and early stages, there are many of you gentlemen dealing with this and are plagued by the symptoms of frequency of urination, feeling like you can't empty or fully void to empty the contents in your bladder. You have lower pelvic pain. You have blood test results that have high levels of PSA, and just the whole angst that it causes for you. Then there's a whole bunch of other elements like your sexual function, your sexual health, erectile functionality. So today's video, we're going to dig into the inflammation of the prostate gland and what all is at play within that inflammation, causative factors, but more importantly, and what you can implement today. So take some notes, gentlemen. You can begin to address those causative factors, change that physical internal environment that then can eradicate the source of the inflammation. Prostatitis is simply inflammation of the prostate. Sometimes it's inflammation related to an infection, and that infection is sometimes a pathogenic invader, like a bacterial infection. Sometimes it's a viral infection. Sometimes an STD falls in that category. Then there's also a fungal invader. So sometimes like candida or some sort of mold toxicity that is present. So any one of those three can be the core causative factors of prostatitis. And the dietary changes that I'm going to recommend have extremely powerful positive impact on the state of your prostate gland overall. So if you're sitting here and you have a staging of prostate cancer, this will help you. If you have a recent diagnosis or a scheduling of a biopsy, and those things are awful. Many of you know, many of you followers of mine, you know my grandfather Gallagher, Gigi, went through a horrific bout in illness with prostatitis, prostate cancer, and it took his life when I was really young. And it left a very poor ill taste of how we address in the medical community prostate cancer. And so this is kind of a mission as an adult to help save as many Gigis out there. So if you are like my Gigi suffering, you are not alone, but also there are a lot of resources. And there's a lot of clinical data behind a lot of the information I'm going to impart to you today. So I want to dig into some dietary changes because these are really easy and very much in your control to start to change the environment. One of the big things with the prostatitis is that there's a pH, the actual pH level of the body. So the whole urinary function, the urinary tract, that pH is imbalanced and the uric acid levels are high and the pH tends to be more acidic. You can test your pH. You can test your pH of your saliva, and you can also test your pH of your urine. This is really easy. There are test strips. I'll include links down below for some affiliate links. They support our channel, but more importantly, they're very helpful tools for you to start to assess and monitor your pH level, which will have a positive impact. These are great tools that will be extremely helpful in you daily, weekly, monthly monitoring your internal body functionality to help reduce the inflammation, minimize the infection, fungal, bacterial, pathogenic invasion, to get you feeling better. And it's pretty miraculous. So the first thing that I recommend is for always, any of my protocols, which, by the way, if you are dealing with any type of prostate-related condition, and if it's also impacting your erectile functionality, I actually have 2 guides. I'll post them here on the screen. These are 2 guides that I built specifically for men like you. I'll include a link down below if you want to grab those. They're under $10. They list out step-by-step details, dietary components, lifestyle changes, supplementation that can be helpful. They're all recommendations that thousands of men have downloaded these guides and are having great results. So I hope you'll check those out. That's a cheap, simple plug for that, but that's not what this video is about. The video is specifically about prostatitis and diet. So number 1, dietary wise, you want to move to a plant-based diet. That's number 1. Why that's recommended is twofold. There's actually a multitude of reasons. But so despite what you think, the diet of a plant-based diet is not deficient in protein. In fact, plant-based proteins are highly beneficial, but they give you a balancing and a neutralizing of your pH level. So breaking that down, that simply means that when you eat plant-based diet, so you eat lots of greens, vegetables, herbs, fruits, all of your kind of wholesome, what was live, nuts and seeds, these can nourish your body by supporting your body with protein, nutrients, and minerals, while also not changing your pH level. So generally, an animal-based protein on the acid scale or the pH scale is way more acidic, where a plant-based protein is going to be a more neutral and base level pH, which can balance out a highly acidic environment. So an infection, gentlemen, gets exacerbated and is a harboring point when we have high pH levels or have a more acidic environment. That's kind of the term. So you really want to go and reach for as many plant-based products as you can. Snacks, juices, herbal beverages, teas, chilled teas, hot teas, but also you're going to be reaching for nutrient-dense, healthy, anti-inflammatory foods as well when you do start to make that plant-based dietary switch, which then segues into my second recommendation, which is to go gluten-free. So I know gluten-free, whenever I say it, it emits a groan like, oh gosh, seriously? So if you are kind of sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, there's no way I can go gluten-free. I love my bread. I love my pasta. I grew up on Italian, or I love to eat gluten every day and I can't live without it. Some of that connection, there's the emotional connection to food, but there's also a biochemical response when gluten is introduced into the body. So one of the things with gluten you have to be really aware of is that gluten and the properties of gluten, when it gets broken down by the body, it becomes a feeding source. It's food for bacteria. The food that you're eating becomes a food for this really unhealthy pathogen or pathogens that live off of the byproduct of the gluten in your gut, your digestive process, but also systemically. And there's a connection between leaky gut and prostatitis. If you're not familiar with leaky gut, I actually have a whole bunch of video content on that. I'll include some links down below. So essentially, leaky gut means that your digestive system has been compromised and is not in its full 100% operating functionality, and that they're these like little, like kind of like sea anemones, you know, in the ocean. They've got like little sea anemones and they've got little tentacles. Well, we have that in our small intestine, and each little tentacle has lots of little hairs, and then at the tip of it has a vacuum. That's what sucks in food and nutrients. Well, over time, gluten ends up burning what we call the microvilli. So that's the hair of the little sea anemones. And then sometimes food particles can clog it and get inflamed. And then that it opens up a little wound or hole in the single cell lining of our small intestine. That then causes what we call leaky gut. Essentially, these small little food particles get in through that single cell lining of our intestines and gets into the bloodstream. That causes systemic inflammation that changes systemically our pH balance. And there's a direct correlation between your gut and your prostate health. So cleaning up your gut is part of clearing out and cleaning up prostatitis. Some of that is through diet, and that's what I'm addressing in this video today. If you want more specifics, comment down below and I'd be happy to do more specific video content on leaky gut and prostatitis or prostate challenges. So going back to the whole leaky gut and the prostate. So one of the things that science has shown us when gentlemen like you are undergoing prostate biopsies, that tissue is collected and it's analyzed. And one of the things that they find across the board, there's always an underlying degree of either bacteria or fungus. So there's a pathogen harboring itself inside that prostate tissue. Your body's immune response happens, you get the enlargement. There's a whole bunch of other things obviously at play. Hormones are a big factor, and I have a whole bunch of prostate related video content on stress and male hormones and low testosterone that is also at play. But E. coli is a big pathogen that we cannot ignore that ends up traveling through the urethra and ends up harboring itself in the prostate. So that bacteria type, as well as a few others, certain types of mold or fungal invasions, those are present and they are at play when it comes to the prostate enlarging. Part of the way the body's immune response is to have your immune response, your lymph nodes, your lymphatic system gets triggered, lymph nodes enlarge, you have all of these immuno cells that are trying to attack the invader. That ends up causing inflammation, sometimes fluid retention in and around a gland or a tissue or whatever it might be. That's what is happening in prostatitis. And then you get the cinching of the tube, which is the urethra, and thereby you end up having emptying bladder challenges and just feeling like you're not fully voiding. That's at play. So food and dietary choices can change both the pH and can help address some of the food and the feeding sources of these pathogens. I'll tell you the one most amazing nutrient for that type of pathogenic exposure, and it's zinc. And a lot of our men, when we do micronutrient panels on them, they have really low zinc levels. So zinc is really key to increasing your immune response to eliminate and help your body fight these pathogens that are harboring themselves in the prostate gland. So think about that when you're making food selections. Nuts and seeds are great resources for zinc consumption. I love pumpkin seeds. I love Brazil nuts. They have the chromium and selenium and a whole bunch of other micronutrients that are very pro-immune boosting. So I mentioned the E. coli, but another thing that is present, and I have to be completely honest with you and admit that I have not come across this as frequently as I should be. And for all of you doing research and trying to figure out, okay, how can I heal my body? How can I limit these horrible biopsies that, you go to your urologist, you get your blood work, your numbers keep elevating, and they're not giving you any solution. They're just putting you on this plan. And 1 out of 7 of you ends up developing prostate cancer, but none of you are given an immediate resource or solution. And that's really why I've built my guides, why I've built a lot of my content here on YouTube, is to address this. So one of the things that I'm not seeing a lot of discussion about that we need to hear more of is that there are yeast infections that you're dealing with. And let's kind of dig back to why that might be at play. It might be leaky gut, but here's the reality is we have sexual relations. Men and women have sexual intercourse, and if, let's say, your partner has some sort of yeast bacterial infection, and I've done a lot of videos for the women, and you can read a lot of the comments. There are a lot of women who are dealing with different yeast or pathogens in the vaginal canal. Sometimes it's vaginal bacteriosis. And I put out a lot of content to help heal their vaginal lining and to help heal that environment from the pathogens. But nobody makes that connection literally between the female bacteria or pathogens and the transmission of that to men after intercourse. This is a reality. And so one of the things when I'm working with a male or female who's coming in with yeast infections or prostatitis or any type of prostate cancer, any of those challenges that have brought you to this video, I sit down actually with both parties, or I try to address the other half. Because you have the melding of two individuals, there is going to be cross-contamination. And I know that sounds really crazy, and this comment down below, if this is like the first time you've ever heard of this, I'm just curious. But the reality is yeast infections are an underlying factor for prostatitis, and we have to address it, gentlemen. For you to get better, we need to not only heal your body, but your partners. And this could be a female partner, male partner, doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, we also need to address your partner's health as well. So make sure they watch this video, okay? And tell them to subscribe to my channel. And if you haven't subscribed, I hope you will. So I just have to put this out there because YouTube has not been favorable to natural health related content and content that kind of deviates from big pharma and, you know, prescription medications and whatever. But the reality is that you are liking my channel, you sharing it, and also subscribing tells YouTube at least that you viewers appreciate this content. And sometimes it'll help us promote this information and help create the awareness to the community. So one of the things specifically about the yeast infections and the prostate gland is that yeast infections are pathogenic infections. Pathogens create something called a biofilm. So essentially a biofilm is a self-protectant cover or slime, if you will, that the bacteria, particularly the yeast or whatever, it harbors itself in. So it literally kind of makes itself all gooey with its byproduct, the biofilm. And that becomes or allows that yeast or that pathogen to be undiscoverable by your immune system. This is really key because a lot of you might have been given some sort of antiviral or antifungal medication, and it can, and even antibiotics, it can explain why they were not effective. So they're ill effective, they won't work because this pathogen has this biofilm covering itself. So how do we address the biofilm? Well, luckily there's a lot of really good food resources. And some of the key foods are going to be things like pineapple for the bromelain. That's an enzyme that can help break down the biofilm. Also, there is something called quercetin. Quercetin is also a food product, and it can be very, very helpful in reducing some of that inflammation, but also break through the biofilm. Many of my prostate patients know nettle and saw palmetto because that tends to be in a lot of the natural supplements that we recommend. I recommend those in my office as well, and I'll put some down in the description box as well if you want to grab some of those. So curcumin is another wonderful biofilm breaker. It literally helps break up the biofilm and allows this pathogen to be discovered. It just kind of washes away the biofilm, if you will, digests it, and allows the body to begin the immune eradication. I actually go even further than that, and this is on all of my protocols. So I'll give you a little sneak peek into one of my protocols for men that are dealing with prostate-related challenges. I actually love to use proteolytic enzymes. These are a particular type of metabolic-related enzymes that will really blast away at that hard, kind of really dense, thick protein protectant shell that we call biofilm. So quercetin, curcumin, even bromelain, these are all going to be found in orange, red, and yellow vegetables and even herbs. So I love turmeric and ginger. Those are two big ones that I also like to incorporate. Quercetin, you can actually take 500 milligrams twice a day. That's kind of the dosage that has been studied by one of the medical journals to actually combat the histamine reaction that is related to that infection. And that's the next thing I want to address, specifically about prostatitis. Histamine reactions generally have an undercurrent, especially when they're really full-blown and long-term. There's an undercurrent called mast cell inflammation. And we all have mast cells. What happens is some people are more susceptible to a mast cell attack. I actually had a patient in Florida that had mast cell activation syndrome. It sounds really complicated, but basically it's like regular cells in her body, these cells became activated and they just multiplied and they'd grow and they became extremely inflamed. So it tends to coincide with folks that have extreme food allergies. So you don't have to have food allergies to have the mast cell activation, but what happens is the mast cells get triggered, and they get triggered usually by some sort of wonky immuno response. And if an individual is plagued with long-term prostatitis, it's not uncommon, and this has been researched, so I'm not just pulling this out of thin air, but it's not uncommon for pathology to actually see the mast cells, and there are ways of testing mast cells. There are specific specialists that do this, but you can actually see that there's a massive histamine response in the body, and it can be localized. It can be global, all over the body. This particular patient that I had, she was a female in her 30s, and she would go into tachycardia because of the mast cell. So it can trigger all different types of nervous system imbalances, glandular imbalances, hormonal stuff. With the male body and the prostate gland specifically, the mast cells end up causing inflammation, and there's an accumulation of fluid as well. And that ends up impacting the lymphatic system. That's how I help a lot of my men in my practice, is I actually do a lot of lymphatic drainage work with them. And it is very powerful at moving the whole entire body's lymphatic system and getting the immune system activated in such a positive way to clear out the fluid that's being retained. And we get some degree of inflammation reduction. But this particular protocol that I'm recommending here on video format will help address some of the histamines. Quercetin particularly, that's what's been studied to decrease that mast cell involvement that then keeps fluid retaining in the prostate gland and in and around the interstitial space. So this will be really helpful for any of you who are dealing with this. So gentlemen, I know I've thrown a lot at you in this video, particularly today, but I wanted to get you as much powerful information that you can begin to immediately put into effect to really address this low-grade inflammation, this low-grade infection that is causing your prostate gland to enlarge. There are a lot of underlying factors. Every male is different. We're all different beings. So there's a lot of factors that I haven't addressed, and so don't shoot the messenger in your comments, but I do hope you found this impactful. I'm curious, are there any of these tips that you are implementing and any that you might be trying out? So I hope you'll test this out. Put it to practice, at least give it 6 to 12 weeks to take effect. So don't give up on it in 2 weeks if you're like, nothing's happening. You have to give your body time to change. And so be patient with your body, but also take control of your health. You are the only one in charge of your health. You are the advocate for your body, and you are the ultimate individual who makes the decisions in terms of what are you going to do to get healthy. And so if something doesn't sit well with you, like a biopsy, that sounds absolutely barbaric, and they are, then there are a lot of other options. And don't feel bad if you are going to maybe go against what your urologist has recommended, or you might deviate from one aspect of their protocol. There are a lot of different ways to heal the body. There's no one correct way, and there's no one right way for one person versus another. So you just have to kind of figure out how your body works and then work with your body. So gentlemen, if this was helpful, give me a thumbs up, comment down below. Stay tuned for more prostate related content. I'm always inspired by your comments and your questions, and I wanted to make sure I got you this content before the end of the month. So thank you for tuning in, and for all of you, I'll see you on our video on Monday. Have a great weekend.